Welcome to Gary's Economics. Today we're going to talk about the perfect tax, which is not a tax at all, the 120-year wealth time limit. Okay, so I want to do a video on an idea called the wealth time limit because I think it's super interesting, but it also explains a little bit. Well, I think it answers a couple of the most common questions that we get on this channel, which are, do you want to raise my taxes? And why do you want to increase taxation on the rich? And also another one, which is, what do you think is the best way to tax the rich? So a few years ago, I made this website called Wealth Economics, and I really recommend looking at it if you're interested in understanding basically why it is I care so much about wealth inequality, and also what wealth inequality does to the economy from the perspective of ordinary families and ordinary people's lives. And a lot of people ask me when I put that website up, well, how do we fix it? And you know, I had a long think about what would be the best way to fix wealth inequality, and I came up with this idea called the wealth time limit. And the idea behind the wealth time limit is you can make as much wealth as you want, you don't pay any tax on it, you can give it to your kids, you can give it to your grandkids, but once you hit your 120th birthday, the wealth is gone basically. So when you give it to your kids, it's in a trust which has your 120th birthday on it. If it goes to your grandkids, it has your 120th birthday on it. Which means basically you can give as much wealth as you want to your kids, your grandkids, even your great-grandkids, but it has to be spent by your 120th birthday. Now, what is nice about this is that it's a zero tax solution, right? There's no tax here, it's a time limit. So say you inherit £10 million from your granddad, and your granddad was 80 years old, you know you've got 40 years to spend that £10 million. And since you know exactly the time limit, you'll make sure that you spend all that money before the time limit. So what is interesting about this is it's a zero tax solution, simply a time limit. Nobody is getting taxed here. But what does happen is very, very wealthy people, they know that they have a fixed amount of time with which they need to spend all of the wealth that they've accumulated. And just to make it clear, they can't just spend the money buying houses. If you buy a house, it stays in the trust, or buying stocks or shares, it stays in the trust. You basically, if you inherit huge amounts of money, you are forced to spend that money over time. And what that means is very, very wealthy families will have to enormously increase their spending. So if you consider, you know, a family that is worth, you know, £1 billion, you know, like Rishi Sunak's family, you know, Rishi Sunak is, I guess he's sort of 45 or something, they would have 75 years to spend £1 billion. And that's really difficult actually, because even over 75 years, you're going to need to spend more than £10 million a year to run that down. And that's not accounting for the fact that Rishi Sunak probably makes from that money 30 million, 40 million pounds a year. So what it means is super rich families have to massively, massively increase their spending. And this would have the consequence of massively increasing wages for working people, because you'd suddenly see a huge amount of demand for goods and services because these rich people would suddenly be spending huge amounts of money. What it would also do is make assets like housing, like stocks and shares, suddenly much, much more affordable for working people. Because on the one hand, wages have gone up a lot. On the other hand, rich people, very rich families would know that they can't simply sit on huge amounts of wealth and grow it over time. They have to sell that, which means that wealth is going to go back into the economy, back to working people. So it would create an economy where wages are super high, where ordinary workers can afford things like houses and property, and basically where ordinary people can get rich off the back of work. And I think this shows that really what matters is that wealth flows around the economy, not just from ordinary families to the rich, but from the rich back to ordinary families. Because at the moment we have a system where over time I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that the wealth of ordinary families is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller over time, over generations, and that is passing to the wealth of the rich and the very rich. And if that happens, then it's obvious ordinary people will get poorer and living standards will fall. But if you have a time limit, it forces the rich to send that wealth back through the economy, and it means that working people will be able to access that wealth and get rich themselves. And I think what this shows is that it's not really simply a question of do you want high tax or do you want low tax? It's a question of do you want an economy where the rich get richer and ordinary people get poorer? Or do you want an economy where everybody has the opportunity to get rich if they work? And I think what this shows is I'm not in this because I want to raise taxes. I'm in this because I want to improve living standards for ordinary people. But I firmly believe, on the basis of what I've seen and what I've done in my career, that the only way to do that is to create an economy where wealth flows around rather than where wealth simply flows upwards. So, yeah, that's the idea. It's the wealth time limit. I think it's really interesting to see that you can make a really thriving economy, even with the low tax economy, if you force the rich to give assets back to working people over time. This is not at all to say that I'm opposed to any of the policies which increase taxation of the rich. I'm super supportive of those policies because I know that if nothing is done to get wealth flowing from the super rich back to ordinary families, then we are going to see the economy get worse and worse and worse over time. But it's simply to show it's not simply a question of high tax or low tax. You know, you could have an economy which is high tax on the rich and very low tax on ordinary workers. And that would be much better than the economy now, which is actually often high tax on workers and low tax on the very rich. Or you could have an economy which is, very low tax on the rich, but forces the rich to give that wealth back. But at the moment, what we have is very low tax on the richest, high tax on workers, and no mechanism to get wealth flowing back around. And if that's what you have, it's inevitable that wealth will flow from ordinary people to the rich and the economy will get worse and worse. So, yeah, the wealth time limit, it's a nice idea. It's just an idea for you to think about, to realize that what really matters is not so much the level of tax, but really the balance of power in the economy and the direction of travel. At the moment, we have an economy where the rich are extremely powerful and they're getting richer and richer and richer. Ordinary people are getting poorer and poorer over time, and that will obviously just to a bad place. But it's not inevitable. There's lots of ways to think of. There's lots of ways to fix it and lots of ways to think about it. So, something to think about. Put a comment. Let me know what you think. Yeah, hope you found it interesting.
That was good. I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you're putting this time limit on it sounds like a good idea for the long term, but in the short term, would it really change anything?
Well, it would if it was actually implemented well, because if you're a very rich family, if you are 50 years old and you're a billionaire, 70 years is not a long time to spend £1 billion. So the very rich families would have to start spending straight away from now, because they know that we have to spend that money. We can't keep it forever. So it would create an enormous immediate economic stimulus.
But then wouldn't they just spend it? Part of the problem you described already, but wouldn't they just spend it on our mum's houses?
Well, this is the thing. The idea is anything you buy with the money in the trust stays in the trust. So if you use the money to buy somebody's house, it doesn't solve your problem, right? Because anything you still have in there when you hit 120 is gone. So it doesn't make any sense for the rich to use that to buy assets because they can't keep them. The idea is basically you have to sell those assets back into the economy. You have to keep those assets moving around.
Okay, sorry, I don't think I understood that. Yeah, that makes sense. I can't think of any other questions.
It's all right. It's no problem.
Yeah, it's a nice.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Also, check out wealtheconomics.org if people are interested. It's a good website. It's went up a long time ago, but it's really nicely explains the ideas. Housing could be so much more affordable, wages could be so much higher, and we could have so many more options in how we live our lives. Some of them put a lot of money into paying economists and think tanks to tell you that inequality is important for the economy. That is not true.